Listen close now because what I'm about to tell you happened in our lifetime, not in some ancient age. In 1952 in Phoenix, Arizona, there stood a school called Desert Valley Elementary. Nearly every child there was Mexican American, sons and daughters of farm workers who picked crops under the burning sun. These families had little money, spoke mostly Spanish, and lived in camps that moved with the harvest seasons. Into this community came a woman named Eleanor Pritchard. She arrived from Boston in 1948, a refined lady of 38 years with soft hands and perfect English. She could have taught anywhere in any wealthy school, but she chose Desert Valley. She learned Spanish. She visited families in their humble homes, bringing food and warm clothing. She organized medical checkups for children who'd never seen a doctor. Parents called her La Maestra Buena, the good teacher. In 1950, Arizona named her Teacher of the Year. The mothers trusted her completely. They believed she was an angel sent to help their children. How wrong they were, how terribly, impossibly wrong. September 3, 1952. A Tuesday morning, warm and bright. 7-year-old Lucia Fernandez walked into Miss Pritchard's classroom with her hair freshly braided by her mother, Carmen. Lucia carried a small lunch pail and wore her best dress, faded but clean. She was excited for second grade. At 8:47 that morning, Miss Pritchard made an announcement. The state health department, she explained, was conducting special health screenings for selected students. She called 6 names. Lucia was among them. The children stood confused but obedient. A man in a white coat waited by the door. Miss Pritchard introduced him as Dr. Phillips from the government. "Come with us to the basement," Miss Pritchard said gently. "It'll only take a few minutes." Lucia looked at her best friend Rosa. "Save my seat," she whispered. "I'll be right back." She followed Miss Pritchard and the doctor down the stairs. The basement door closed behind them. That was the last time Rosa or anyone at that school ever saw Lucia Fernandez alive. At 3:15 that afternoon, Carmen Fernandez waited outside Desert Valley Elementary. Other mothers collected their children, but Lucia never appeared. Carmen's heart began to race. She went inside and found Miss Pritchard organizing papers at her desk. "Where is my daughter?" Carmen asked in halting English. Miss Pritchard looked up with concerned eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Fernandez, didn't you receive the message? A relative came to pick Lucia up early, around noon." Carmen's blood went cold. "I have no relatives in Phoenix. No one has permission to take her." Miss Pritchard pulled out a sign-out sheet. There, in writing Carmen swore was not her own, was a signature authorizing early dismissal. "See, you signed right here." "That is not my signature," Carmen insisted, her voice rising. Miss Pritchard's expression hardened just slightly. "Mrs. Fernandez, I understand you're upset. Perhaps you forgot signing it this morning. These things happen." Carmen ran to the police station that night. The officer barely looked up. "Probably ran back to Mexico," he said. "These people are always moving around." Let me tell you about Eleanor Pritchard's secret, the burden she carried from Boston. Her father had died in 1947, leaving mountains of debt. But worse than that, her younger brother Timothy suffered from polio. He lay in an institution, his legs useless, his body racked with pain. The care he needed cost $4,800 each year. Eleanor's teacher salary was only $2,400 annually. Every month, she fell further behind on Timothy's bills. She watched her brother suffer in a terrible facility, knowing she couldn't afford to move him somewhere better. The guilt ate at her like acid. Then, in March 1952, she received a letter. It came from the Southwestern Medical Research Corporation, signed by a Dr. Harrison Blackwell. The letter was careful, professional. It spoke of important medical research, of testing new vaccines that could save thousands of lives. It mentioned the need for subjects from low-visibility populations. Dr. Blackwell included a phone number. Eleanor stared at that letter for 3 days before she called. When she finally did, her hands shook so badly she could barely dial. Dr. Harrison Blackwell was a smooth-talking man of 52, with silver hair and expensive suits. He met Eleanor at a quiet restaurant outside Phoenix. Over coffee, he explained his work. Southwestern Medical Research had contracts with big pharmaceutical companies, Hartman Pharmaceuticals, Allied Chemical. They were developing vaccines for polio, testing new medicines, conducting research that would benefit all of humanity. "We need children for clinical trials," Dr. Blackwell said calmly, "but finding subjects is difficult. Parents are understandably protective." Eleanor understood what he was really saying. He needed children whose disappearance wouldn't cause problems, children from families nobody listened to. How much? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. $40 per child delivered to our facility. Eleanor thought of Timothy, twisted in pain on his institutional bed. $50, she countered, and I need guaranteed care for my brother. Dr. Blackwell smiled. They shook hands. That handshake sealed the fate of 847 children. Eleanor wrote in her journal that night, March 17, 1952, I have found a way to save Timothy. God forgive me. Eleanor chose her first group carefully in April 1952. 5 children, ages 6 to 9, all from families in temporary labor camps. These families moved constantly, following crops from farm to farm. If their children disappeared, who would even notice? She told the parents their children had been selected for a special advanced program at the State Educational Center. The parents were proud. Their children, chosen for something special, they signed the papers Eleanor forged, trusting her completely. On a Friday afternoon, Eleanor led the 5 children to a waiting van. They were excited, chattering about the adventure ahead. The van drove them 40 miles outside Phoenix to an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium. Inside, Dr. Blackwell's team waited with syringes filled with experimental polio vaccines. The children were injected. Within hours, 3 developed high fevers, their small bodies convulsed. 6-year-old Miguel Torres went into seizures that wouldn't stop. 48 hours after the injection, Miguel was dead. His body was cremated, recorded as an unclaimed tuberculosis victim. Back at the labor camp, Miguel's parents received a letter from Eleanor. Miguel is doing wonderfully in the advanced program. He'll return at semester's end. They believed her. They waited. He never came home. Eleanor received $250 for those first 5 children. She immediately transferred Timothy to a better facility. The new place had warm rooms, attentive nurses, and modern therapy equipment. For the first time in years, Timothy was comfortable. Eleanor couldn't sleep that first week. She saw Miguel's face every time she closed her eyes. But then she visited Timothy. She watched her brother walk 12 steps with braces and crutches, his face shining with hope and joy. She wrote in her journal, May 2, 1952, Timothy took 12 steps today, 12, whatever I've done, it was worth it. Her conscience, already cracking, shattered completely that day. She made her second delivery in June, 8 children this time. In September, she delivered 12 more, including little Lucia Fernandez. Eleanor developed a system. She created fake transfer documents that looked official. She practiced forging parent signatures until they seemed real. She kept 2 sets of records, the school's official books showing proper transfers and her private ledger listing names, dates, and payments received. Eleanor had become efficient at evil. Antonio Morales was the school custodian, 54 years old, with 3 daughters who all attended Desert Valley Elementary. Antonio mopped floors and emptied trash cans, but he wasn't blind. He noticed things others missed. He saw Miss Pritchard leading children to the basement, children who left through the back exit instead of returning to class. He noticed the unmarked white vans that appeared on those days, vans with medical equipment visible through the windows. One September afternoon in 1952, Antonio decided to follow one of those vans. He drove his old truck at a distance, trailing the van for 40 miles into the desert. It stopped at an old sanatorium, isolated and surrounded by empty land. Antonio parked and crept closer. Through a window, he saw children lying in beds wearing hospital gowns, crying. He saw men in white coats standing over them with clipboards. He saw needles and restraints. Antonio's hands shook as he drove back to Phoenix. The next day, he waited until after school, then confronted Eleanor in her empty classroom. Miss Pritchard, he said quietly, what's happening to those children? Eleanor looked up from her desk, her face completely calm. She studied Antonio for a long moment, her green eyes cold and calculating. Antonio, she said softly, you're a good man, you've worked here for many years, you have 3 daughters, don't you, all beautiful girls, all students at this school. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Antonio felt his stomach drop, but he was brave, braver than he should have had to be. I'm going to the police, he said, those children need help. Eleanor smiled, it was not a kind smile. Do what you think is right, Antonio. Antonio went straight to the Phoenix Police Department. Officer Dale Hutchinson took his report with obvious skepticism. A Mexican custodian accusing a white teacher? The officer called the school anyway. Elena arrived 30 minutes later with a briefcase full of perfect paperwork, transfer forms with parent signatures, official state program documentation, all forged but convincing. Elena also made a phone call to someone at City Hall. The Pritchard family name still carried weight, even in Arizona. 24 hours after Antonio filed his police report, officers knocked on his door. They arrested him for suspicion of indecent conduct with a minor. An anonymous tip, they said, a student had complained. The accusation was completely false, manufactured by people whose names Antonio would never know. But in 1952 Phoenix, a Mexican immigrant's word meant nothing against a respected white teacher. Antonio was fired from his custodian job. His daughters were pulled from school in shame. His wife, unable to bear the disgrace, left him. Antonio spent 6 months in jail. When he was released in March 1953, he was broken, homeless, branded a predator, his reputation destroyed forever. He tried to tell newspapers his story about the missing children, about Miss Pritchard and the Vans. No one would listen. They all knew him as the disgraced custodian. In 1956, Antonio Morales died in an alley from exposure and alcoholism. He was 58 years old. The truth he'd tried to tell died with him, or so everyone thought, but truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it. From 1952 to 1959, Elena Pritchard delivered 847 children to Dr. Blackwell's facility. Think about that number. 847, nearly 1,000 souls. She averaged 10 to 12 children every month, more during harvest season when families were most transient and vulnerable. The experiments expanded beyond polio vaccines. The children were exposed to radiation to test its effects. They were injected with pesticides to study toxicity levels. They underwent psychological conditioning experiments that broke their minds. Some were simply starved to measure how long a child could survive on minimal rations. Southwestern Medical Research had lucrative contracts. Hartman Pharmaceuticals paid for vaccine testing. Allied Chemical paid for pesticide research. Even the U.S. Army Medical Research Division funded certain projects, though those records remain classified to this day. Out of 847 children, 288 died. That's a death rate of 34%. Their small bodies were disposed of efficiently, cremated and listed as indigent tuberculosis victims, or buried in unmarked mass graves at the county cemetery. Some simply vanished, their bodies never accounted for. Not all children died. Some were returned to their families after 2 or 3 months of experiments. Elena selected these children carefully, those subjected to milder tests, those likely to survive. She told parents their children had been at educational programs learning valuable skills. The children came back changed. They were silent, haunted, unable to explain what had happened to them. Many had nightmares that made them scream in their sleep. When they did speak, they mentioned the needles, the white rooms, the screaming at night. Parents noticed strange things, unexplained scars, burns, bruises that looked like restraint marks. 8-year-old Anita Cruz returned with terrible burns on her arms. Elena explained it away as an accident in the school kitchen. Anita never spoke another word for the rest of her life, selective mutism caused by trauma so severe her mind simply shut down. Anita is still alive today. She's 79 years old, living in Tucson. She communicates only through writing. In 1995, she published a memoir called The Silent Witness, describing in careful handwriting the radiation experiments, the pain, the children dying in beds next to hers. She has never in 71 years spoken a single word aloud. Carmen Fernandez never stopped searching for Lucia. Every single day for 7 years she walked past Desert Valley Elementary, hoping somehow to see her daughter's face. She organized other mothers whose children had transferred to mysterious programs. 23 women formed a secret group they called Las Madres Perdidas, the Lost Mothers. They met in church basements and kitchen corners, comparing stories in whispered Spanish. They noticed the pattern: all poor families, all migrant workers, all children who supposedly transferred but never sent letters, never came home. They tried to visit the state educational center that Elena always mentioned. They searched Phoenix for it. It didn't exist. There was no such place. Las Madres Perdidas went to police stations, newspaper offices, churches, government buildings. Everyone dismissed them with the same racist assumptions. Your children probably just went back to Mexico. The mothers were treated as hysterical, stupid, unable to keep track of their own children. The racism was crushing and explicit. These women were fighting not just a leaner Pritchard but an entire system designed to ignore their pain, yet they kept fighting, kept searching, kept demanding answers that nobody would give them. In November 1956, something extraordinary happened. A 10-year-old boy named Francisco Delgado, everyone called him Paco, was selected by a leaner and delivered to the facility. Paco was subjected to experimental pesticide exposure tests, locked in a room filled with chemical fumes to measure their effects on children's lungs. But Paco was clever and brave beyond his years. For 3 weeks he watched the nurses memorizing their routines. He observed the locks, the guard schedules, the building layout. He was planning. On December 4, 1956, at 3 in the morning, Paco picked the lock on his restraints using a bent wire he'd hidden. He climbed through a laundry chute, dropped into the basement, and ran. He ran through 40 miles of desert barefoot, wearing only a thin hospital gown. It took him 2 days. On December 6, barely alive from exposure and dehydration, Paco collapsed on the steps of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Phoenix. Father Miguel Rodriguez found him at dawn. The priest carried the boy inside, gave him water, wrapped him in blankets, and when Paco could finally speak, he told Father Miguel everything: the facility, the experiments, the children dying, Miss Pritchard's involvement, everything. Father Miguel Rodriguez was 42 years old, a man of God who believed in protecting the innocent. He listened to Paco's story and knew immediately it was true. The boy's details were too specific, his trauma too real to be invented. Father Miguel didn't go to the police. He didn't trust them, not after what had happened to Antonio Morales. Instead, he hid Paco in the church rectory and began his own investigation. He visited Desert Valley Elementary, speaking with Alina Pritchard while studying her carefully. She was charming, showed him immaculate records, smiled warmly. But Father Miguel noticed something on her desk, a child's drawing. The picture showed stick figures lying in beds surrounded by needles. One figure was labeled Dr. Badman in childish handwriting. Alina snatched the drawing away quickly. "Children have such imaginations," she said with a tight smile. Father Miguel secretly contacted Las Madres Perdidas. Together, over months of careful work, they documented 73 missing children whose cases showed identical patterns. Father Miguel wrote letters to every government agency he could find. Most ignored him. But one didn't: FBI Special Agent Wesley Harding in the Phoenix field office. Wesley Harding was 36 years old, a career FBI agent known for his thoroughness. When Father Miguel's letter arrived in March 1957, Harding was skeptical. Missing children, evil teacher, secret experiments — it sounded like hysteria or conspiracy theory. But procedure required investigation. Harding met with Father Miguel, then with Las Madres Perdidas. He interviewed the mothers one by one. Their stories were remarkably consistent. He interviewed Paco, and the boys detailed descriptions of the facility's layout, the experiments, the staff. It was too specific to fabricate. Harding began surveillance of Desert Valley Elementary. He photographed the unmarked vans, documented the pattern of children transferring. He traced the vans' license plates to Southwestern Medical Research Corporation. He found corporate filings connecting the company to Hartman Pharmaceuticals and Allied Chemical, major corporations with government contracts. In April 1957, Harding requested a federal warrant to raid the facility and arrest Alina Pritchard. The warrant was denied. Insufficient evidence, his superiors said, but Harding knew the real reason. Southwestern Medical Research had powerful connections. Allied Chemical was a defense contractor. The military research contracts meant someone in government knew about these experiments and had authorized them. Alina sensed danger. She noticed a man watching the school, Agent Harding, though she didn't know his name. Father Miguel's questions had unsettled her, and Dr. Blackwell had told her about Paco's escape, warning her they were searching for the boy. Her journal entries became frantic. May 15, 1957, "They're closing in, but Timothy needs me. I can't stop now. I won't stop." She accelerated deliveries, 18 children in May alone. She became careless, forging documents with obvious errors. Some parents began openly confronting her. Paulo Jimenez, a farm worker whose son had vanished, came to the school and threatened to break down every door in Phoenix until he found his boy. That night, Paulo was attacked in an alley. 2 men beat him severely, breaking 3 ribs and his left arm. They left him bleeding with a message: Stop asking questions about your son or next time it'll be worse. Maybe we'll visit your wife. Paulo was terrified into silence, but his wife, Isabel Jimenez, was not. She joined Las Matters Perdidas with fury in her heart and helped organize what came next, the action that would finally force Phoenix to pay attention. In August 1957, Las Matters Perdidas decided they would no longer wait politely for men to save their children. 23 mothers, led by Carmen Fernandez and Isabel Jimenez, staged a sit-in at Desert Valley Elementary. They arrived at dawn, walked into the building, and sat down in the hallway. They refused to leave until authorities investigated Miss Pritchard. Local news cameras arrived. For the first time, Phoenix media covered the story. The headline read, "Mexican mothers claim missing children, school denies all knowledge." Eleanor called the police. The mothers were arrested for trespassing and led away in handcuffs. But something had shifted. The wider Mexican-American community had seen those mothers on television, heard their accusations. Word spread like wildfire through Phoenix's Latino neighborhoods. In September 1957, 500 people marched on Desert Valley Elementary. Parents refused to send their children to school. The building stood empty. The Phoenix School Board, panicking, placed Eleanor on administrative leave pending investigation. An investigator was hired. He found all Eleanor's paperwork in order. Of course he did. She'd forged it expertly. In October 1957, Eleanor was reinstated. Las Matters Perdidas wept with rage and despair. But something else happened in October 1957. A nurse named Catherine Walsh, 29 years old, had been working at Dr. Blackwell's facility for 2 years. She'd been told the children were orphans, wards of the state with no families. She believed she was helping important medical research. Then, in late September, a 12-year-old girl died during a radiation experiment, her body convulsing as her organs failed. Catherine held the girl's hand as she died. Afterward, Catherine broke protocol and looked through the facility's records. She found that the girl had a mother who was actively searching for her. She found the names of Las Matters Perdidas. Catherine's conscience shattered. These weren't orphans, they were stolen children. She'd been helping torture and kill children whose mothers loved them, whose mothers were desperately searching for them. Catherine contacted FBI agent Harding secretly. She provided him with internal documents, experimental protocols, mortality records, and most damning photographs. The photographs were horrific. Children restrained to tables, radiation burns covering their small bodies, chemical exposure wounds. With Catherine's evidence, Agent Harding finally obtained federal warrants. November 22, 1957, federal agents prepared to raid the facility and arrest everyone involved. At 6:00 a.m. on November 22, 1957, federal agents stormed the facility outside Phoenix. They found 34 children currently imprisoned there, ages 6 to 14, in various states of medical distress. Some could barely walk, some had radiation burns, some were so psychologically broken they couldn't speak. Agents also found medical equipment, research documents, and Eleanor's ledger. That ledger was meticulous, 847 names, each with a date delivered, experiment assigned, payment received, and outcome. The outcome column used 3 codes, R for returned, D for deceased, T for transferred. There were 288 Ds. Dr. Blackwell was arrested on site. Simultaneously, agents raided Desert Valley Elementary's basement. They found Eleanor's forged documents, her correspondence with Southwestern Medical, and her personal journals detailing everything she'd done. At 8:30 a.m., agents entered Eleanor's classroom. Students watched as their beloved teacher was handcuffed. She was crying, repeating over and over, "I did it for Timothy, I only did it for Timothy." The children didn't understand. Some began crying because Miss Pritchard was crying. Outside, Las Matters Perdidas gathered, having heard the news. They stood silently as Eleanor was led out in handcuffs. Carmen Fernandez stood in front, her face carved from stone. In December 1957, Eleanor Pritchard was charged with 847 counts of kidnapping and 288 counts of murder. Dr. Harrison Blackwell faced similar charges. Corporate executives from Southwestern Medical Research, Hartman Pharmaceuticals, and Allied Chemical were charged with conspiracy. It should have been the trial of the century. It should have exposed everything. But in January 1958, something shocking happened. The the federal government intervened, classifying the case under national security. Military research connections to Allied Chemical and the Army Medical Research Division meant the experiments had tacit government approval. A trial would expose that American military and corporate leaders had knowingly funded the torture of children. It would reveal that officials at the highest levels knew and did nothing. The government offered a plea deal. Eleanor and Dr. Blackwell would plead guilty to reduced charges. There would be no trial, no public testimony, no media coverage beyond the initial arrest. In March 1958, Eleanor Pritchard was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Dr. Blackwell received 35 years. The corporate executives received immunity in exchange for shutting down Southwestern medical research. Las Matters Perdidas were devastated. No justice, no accountability, no public reckoning. Eleanor was sent to federal women's prison in Alderson, West Virginia. In June 1958, she granted one interview to a Phoenix newspaper reporter. Her words were chilling. "I saved my brother," she said calmly. "That's all that matters. Those children contributed to medical science. Their deaths weren't in vain. Medical research requires sacrifice. Someone has to sacrifice." The reporter, shocked, asked about Carmen Fernandez, who'd searched for Lucia for 6 years. Eleanor's response was ice cold. She should be proud. Her daughter helped advance polio research. Lucia's death had meaning. When the interview was published, it caused national outrage. Las Matters Perdidas read Eleanor's words and wept with fury. She felt no remorse, not even the smallest sliver of guilt. She believed she'd been right. Eleanor Pritchard died in federal prison on March 15, 1974. She was 64 years old, dead from heart failure after serving 16 years. Her final words to the prison chaplain, "I would do it again. Timothy lived, that's all that matters." She was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. Timothy, still alive, refused to claim her body. In 1976, the federal government finally released partial records. Carmen Fernandez, now 66 years old, received the document she'd been waiting for. Lucia's name appeared in the ledger. Delivered September 3, 1952. Experimental Group 7B, deceased October 11, 1952. Cause: adverse reaction to experimental vaccine compound. Lucia had died 6 weeks after vanishing, 1 month after her 7th birthday. Carmen read those words sitting at her kitchen table. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears years ago. She simply sat there holding the paper for 3 hours. Carmen Fernandez died in 1983 at age 73. Until her last day, she kept Lucia's school photograph on her nightstand, faded and creased from being touched so many times. In the photograph, Lucia smiles gap-toothed and joyful. She has no idea what's coming. She's just a little girl excited about 2nd grade. 1989, construction workers discovered a mass grave near the former facility site. They found 127 small bodies, mostly children ages 5 to 12. Forensic analysis confirmed experimental medical trauma, radiation exposure, chemical poisoning, surgical procedures. In 2015, advanced DNA testing identified 41 children. Families finally held funerals. 86 children remain unidentified. Timothy Pritchard learned the truth in 1958 when he was 28. He'd recovered significantly from polio with the care Eleanor's money had provided. He was walking with leg braces, living independently, starting a career. When he discovered how his sister had obtained that money, Timothy tried to kill himself. He survived but lived the rest of his life crushed by guilt. He never married, never had children. He donated all his money to a scholarship fund for Mexican-American students. He never spoke publicly about Eleanor. Timothy died in 1994 at age 64. His will contained one sentence about Eleanor: "I pray God forgives her because I cannot." Of the 34 children rescued in 1957, most struggled with severe trauma. Many were never reunited with their families because records were lost. Paco Delgado was reunited with his family and became a social worker, dedicating his life to protecting children. He died in 2019 at age 73, still haunted by nightmares. Approximately 200 survivors are still living today, ages 70 to 85. Many suffer radiation-induced cancers and PTSD. Their children show higher rates of birth defects linked to parental radiation exposure. The trauma echoes through generations. In 1998, the federal government issued a formal apology and established a victim compensation fund. Survivors and families received $50,000 each. Many saw it as insulting blood money, but some accepted it out of desperate financial need. Desert Valley Elementary closed in 1985. The building was demolished in 1992. The site is now Lucia Fernandez Memorial Gardens, maintained by Carmen's surviving daughter Alina, now 78 years old. Every September 3rd, families gather to read the names of the 847 children. A bell rings once for each name. It takes 7 hours. This year, 400 people attended. They spoke the names slowly, carefully: Lucia Fernandez, Miguel Torres, Anita Cruz, Francisco Delgado, each name a stolen life, a destroyed family, a wound that never healed. The youngest generation asks, "Could this happen again?" The elders answer, "It never stopped happening. Different methods, different victims, but the same evil. We must remember, we must bear witness, we must speak their names." This is why I tell you this story, not to entertain but to warn, not to horrify but to honor. 847 children. Say their names, remember them, let their deaths mean something.